For Christmas, my parents gave my sister the newest iPhone. You've earned it, Dad said with pride. When I opened my gift, I found a notebook from the dollar store and a pen that didn't even work. Mom chuckled and my sister laughed. I forced a smile, but later that night, I walked off. Days later, my parents called. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. Even as I grew older, I still felt a spark of excitement each December. It wasn't about the presents, I wasn't a child anymore, but the atmosphere of it all. The lights twinkling softly in the living room, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air, and the warmth that made everything feel cozier despite the cold outside. Most of all, I loved the tradition. Every year, my family stuck to the same Christmas morning routine. We'd wake up early, still in pajamas, and gather in the living room, hot chocolate in hand. Mom would put on the same Christmas playlist, songs I'd heard 1,000 times before, yet they still made me smile. Dad would hand out the gifts one at a time, so each of us could open something while the others watched. It was something small, something familiar, something I thought we all appreciated. This year, however, felt different. It began with the small things. My parents had been distant in the weeks leading up to Christmas, barely acknowledging me unless they needed something. Conversations were short and forced, like they were simply going through the motions. My younger sister Jane, however, had been the center of their attention. They were always talking to her about school, her soccer games, her friends. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was overthinking it, but deep down, I felt it. I just didn't expect Christmas morning to confirm it so clearly. That morning, I woke to the sound of Jane laughing downstairs and the smell of coffee wafted through the air. For a brief moment, I smiled. I pushed away the uncomfortable feeling in my chest, trying to ignore the thought that something wasn't right. I made my way downstairs, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and walked into the living room. The tree stood tall in the corner, glowing with soft, colorful lights. Beneath it sat the usual pile of presents, perfectly wrapped with shiny bows. Dad and Mom were already on the couch, sipping their coffee while Jane sat cross-legged on the floor, her face glowing with excitement. "There you are," Dad said, offering a quick smile. "We were just about to start without you." I sat down next to Jane, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe I was overthinking it, and this Christmas would be just like the others. Dad reached under the tree and grabbed a gift, handing it to Jane first, as he always did. She eagerly tore it open, revealing a pair of brand new sneakers, the ones she'd been talking about nonstop for weeks. Her eyes lit up as she looked up at our parents. "No way, these are awesome!" Dad laughed. "We knew you'd love them." Mom chuckled. "There's plenty more where that came from, honey." I smiled at Jane. "Nice," I said, trying to sound excited. "Those are cool." She barely looked at me before moving on to her next present. I sat quietly as she unwrapped gift after gift. High-end clothes, a gaming headset, a gift card to her favorite store. With each new gift, my stomach tightened. Then, Dad handed her the big one. A sleek, perfectly wrapped box with a bright red bow. Jane's eyes widened as she grabbed it, practically ripping the paper off in one motion. Her jaw dropped as she held up the latest iPhone, still in its original packaging. "No way!" she shouted. "This is insane!" Dad beamed. "You earned it," he said, ruffling her hair. Mom gave her a pat on the back. "You've worked hard, kiddo! You deserve it!" Jane grinned, turning the box over in her hands. "This is the best Christmas ever!" I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to smile. Then, Dad turned to me. "Oh, almost forgot," he said, reaching under the tree. He pulled out a small, lumpy package wrapped hastily in thin paper. "Here you go." I took it slowly, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. The wrapping crinkled in my hands as I peeled it away, revealing a cheap, flimsy notebook, the kind you find at the dollar store, with a thin cardboard cover and rough-lined pages. I reached inside again and pulled out a single plastic pen. I clicked it, but nothing happened. The ink was dry. For a moment, I just stared at it, trying to process what I was seeing. Then a snicker broke the silence. I looked up. Mom was smirking, and Jane burst out laughing. "Wow," she said, shaking her head. Guess someone wasn't that good this year. Dad sipped his coffee without saying a word. I forced a smile, gripping the notebook tightly. Thanks, I muttered. Nobody responded, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. Later that night, long after the laughter had died down and everyone had gone to bed, I lay in my room, staring at the ceiling. The cheap notebook sat on my desk, unopened, and the dead pen lay beside it. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to convince myself I was overreacting. It's just a gift, I thought. It's not about the presents, it's about family. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about the gifts. It was about what they represented. Jane had gotten everything she wanted. Mom and Dad had spent months listening to her, caring about what would make her happy, ensuring she felt loved and appreciated. Me? I got a last-minute, thoughtless present. Something that screamed, we didn't even try. I hadn't done anything wrong. My grades were good. I helped around the house. I did everything they asked, yet I was treated like an afterthought. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I had spent years pretending it didn't bother me, laughing off the favoritism, telling myself that maybe one day they'd see me. Maybe if I worked harder, did more, became better, they would finally love me the way they loved her. But tonight, something changed in me. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to care. I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could, my hand shaking. I grabbed my backpack from the corner of the room and started packing it with clothes. A hoodie, a couple of t-shirts, my savings, whatever little I had. I didn't have a real plan, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here. Not when it felt like I was invisible. Not when it hurt this much. I slipped on my shoes, took one last look at my room, the same room I had spent my whole life in. And then, I did something I never thought I would. I left. Days later, my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. I had been ignoring them for days, but then the screen lit up again. 7 missed calls. A text appeared. Where are you? Please come back. My parents were panicking, but did they really care? Or were they just scared of how people would perceive them? I took a deep breath. I had a choice to make. I stared at the phone for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. The message was clear. They were looking for me, desperate for me to come back. But why? Was it because they missed me, or just because everything had become too complicated for them to fix? A wave of bitterness rose in my chest. But then another thought crept in. What if they were genuinely worried? What if they realized what they'd done wrong? I turned off the phone, staring at it for a while before putting it back in my pocket. I didn't know what to think anymore. My whole life, I had tried to prove myself, tried to be the son they'd finally notice, the one they would look at with pride, like they did with Jane. But all that time, all those years, I'd been invisible. And now they were panicking because I was gone. But were they panicking because they realized they messed up? Or because they were losing control of their perfect image of a happy family? I didn't know, and right now I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out. The next few days were the quietest I had ever known. I stayed at a friend's house, not telling anyone where I was. I spent my time reflecting, wondering if I was being dramatic. But the more I thought about everything, the more I realized I was tired of always being the afterthought. A few days later, I got a call. It was Dad. He sounded frantic, almost pleading. Please, come home. We've been so worried. It's not like this. We promise we'll fix it. Just come home. I sat silently for a moment. Did I really want to go back? It took me a while, but I finally decided to pick up the phone. I'm not coming back. There was a long pause on the other end. What do you mean? You need to come home. Your mother and I, we're sorry. We were wrong. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. I don't know if I can believe you, I said softly. You've treated me like I don't matter for years. It's not just about the presents, Dad. It's about how I've been invisible all this time. I don't know if I can just forget that. I hung up the phone, taking a deep breath, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be anyone's second choice anymore. The days after that phone call felt like a blur. I spent most of my time reflecting, trying to find some peace within myself. My mind bounced back and forth. One moment, I felt like I was doing the right thing, standing up for myself. And the next, I felt a pang of guilt. I wasn't used to being defiant. I wasn't used to putting my foot down and demanding respect. My entire life, I had been the good son, the one who followed the rules and did everything expected of me. But now, I was walking away from everything that had once felt familiar, and it was hard. I thought about that Christmas morning, the look on my parents' faces when they handed Jane that shiny new phone, their pride so clear. I thought about the way I had smiled through gritted teeth, pretending everything was okay, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Christmas. This was about years of being overlooked, of feeling like I didn't matter. And I didn't want to go back to that. 2 weeks later, my dad showed up at my friend's house unannounced. I opened the door, startled to see him standing there, looking different. He was no longer the stern, distant figure I had known all my life. His eyes were red and his face was pale, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Can I talk to you?" he asked softly. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do, but something in his voice made me hesitate. I stepped aside, letting him come in. We sat down in the living room, and for the first time in a long time, the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was raw, almost fragile. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know I can't take back what happened, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. For years, I treated you like you didn't matter. I know that now. I see it, and I hate myself for it." I could feel my chest tighten. This wasn't the apology I expected. I didn't expect him to take full responsibility like this, to admit his mistake so openly. But there was something in his tone that made me want to believe him. "You're not invisible," he continued, his voice cracking. "I loved you, but I got so caught up in making sure Jane had everything I thought she needed that I didn't realize how much I was neglecting you. You've always been enough, just the way you are. And I'm so sorry I made you feel otherwise," my dad said, his voice filled with regret. I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to accept his apology, but another part felt like I needed more than just words. "I don't know if I can just come back," I whispered. "It's going to take time. You can't just fix this with a few sentences." He nodded, tears rolling down his face. "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right, but I don't want to lose you. Please, just give me a chance." The weeks after that emotional talk with my dad were filled with uncertainty and hope. Things were different now, but I wasn't about to let my guard down completely. The hurt from feeling invisible for so long didn't disappear overnight, and I couldn't just overlook the years of neglect. No matter how much my parents tried to make things better, I still found myself holding back. I wanted to make sure this wasn't just a temporary change, a short-lived attempt to fix things. I didn't want to get hurt again. But then, something unexpected happened. One night, a few weeks after the apology, Jane called me. "I'm sorry," she said, sounding genuine. "I never meant to make you feel like that. I'm a jerk, and I didn't even realize what was happening until everything blew up. I didn't think about how you felt, and for that, I'm sorry." It felt strange to hear her say that. Jane and I had always had a sibling rivalry, but it was never this deep. We fought, sure, but it was the kind of fighting that felt normal, like any other brother and sister. But this felt different. It felt real. I wasn't sure what to say at first, but then I took a breath and replied, "Thank you. I didn't expect an apology from you, but it means a lot." She sounded relieved. "I really hope we can get along better. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore." Over the next few months, I saw my family slowly begin to change. I won't say everything was perfect right away, because it wasn't. There were still awkward moments, times when I questioned if they really meant what they said, but gradually, the distance between us shrank. My parents started to make an effort to ask about my day, to check in on me without it feeling like a duty. The best part? They stopped comparing me to Jane. I noticed this most when I got a new job offer. Instead of the usual, "Well, Jane did this," or "Jane got that," I heard, "We're so proud of you." As the months went on, things with my family continued to improve. The apologies felt more sincere, and I could tell my parents were genuinely trying to make things right. They were listening, really listening, when I spoke. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments where I felt a flicker of old resentment, but things were better. And I could see that they were trying. Jane, too, our relationship improved slowly. We had our awkward moments, but every conversation felt like progress. Sometimes we joked around like we used to or talked about things we never had the chance to discuss before. While I still wasn't ready to completely forget the past, I couldn't deny that I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, things could return to some version of normal. I never expected that apology from Jane, and I still don't think she fully understood the depth of how much her actions had hurt me. But the fact that she made an effort and acknowledged what had happened meant something. The biggest change, though, came from my parents. They took responsibility, which was huge. For years, I had felt invisible, like I didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. That Christmas morning was the tipping point. But in the months that followed, I saw them put their words into action. They didn't just apologize, they made sure I knew that I was valued. They made it clear that I wasn't second place, not an afterthought. It wasn't about the presents anymore. It was about the time, the attention, and the care. I started to see my parents as people, not just as figures in my life who only cared about their image of a perfect family. But even with all of that, I realized something important. I had learned to stand up for myself. I had learned that it was okay to walk away when I needed to, and that it was okay to demand more. For years, I had been silent, playing the role of the invisible child. But walking away made me realize I had a voice. I had a right to be heard, and maybe that was the most important lesson of all. So, looking back, was it the right decision to leave? Was it the right decision to stand up for myself and demand respect, even if it meant hurting my family in the process? In the end, I think I did what I needed to do. It pushed my family to change, and it pushed me to find strength I didn't know I had. Honestly, I think I made the right call. It's tough to walk away from family, but sometimes it's the only way to get people to understand how much their actions have hurt you. What do you all think? Was I right to leave? Or should I have stayed and tried to work things out quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you think I handled it well, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. 3 years have passed since that Christmas morning that changed everything. I'm in my own apartment now, small but comfortable, and it feels like mine. The walls are decorated with photos, some new, some old, telling the story of how far we've all come. There's even one from last Christmas, all of us together, genuine smiles on our faces. It wasn't an easy road to get here. The first year after I left was the hardest. Even after that initial reconciliation, there were moments when old habits tried to creep back in. I remember the first family dinner I attended after moving back home. Jane had just gotten a promotion at her job, and for a brief moment, I saw Dad start to make that familiar comparison. But he caught himself, meeting my eyes with an apologetic look. Instead of comparing, he asked me about my new project at work. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Mom took longer to adjust. She had always been the quieter parent, following Dad's lead in most things. But slowly, she started forming her own relationship with me. It started with coffee dates, just the two of us, where she'd really listen to what I had to say. No comparisons, no expectations, just genuine interest in my life and who I was as a person. The real test came when I decided to switch careers. I had been working in finance, following the path everyone expected, but my heart wasn't in it. What I really wanted was to pursue music production, something I'd been passionate about since high school, but had never dared to voice. The old me would have kept quiet, stuck to the safe path to avoid disappointing anyone. But I wasn't that person anymore. I called a family meeting, something we'd started doing monthly after everything that happened. Sitting in the living room, the same room where the Christmas disaster had unfolded, I told them about my decision. The silence that followed felt endless. Jane spoke first, surprising me. "That's amazing," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Remember when we were kids and you used to mix songs on that old laptop? You were always so good at it." I blinked, taken aback. I didn't even know she remembered that. Dad leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Are you sure about this? It's a big change." There was concern in his voice, but no judgment. "That was new." "I am," I replied, bracing myself for the disappointment I half expected to see. Instead, he nodded. "Then we'll support you. Just tell us what you need." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "We want you to be happy, sweetheart. Really happy, not just doing what you think we want." That conversation would have been unimaginable 3 years ago, but here we were, talking openly, honestly, each of us trying in our own way to be better. The changes weren't just in my family. I changed too. Learning to stand up for myself that Christmas morning had awakened something in me. I started therapy, working through years of feeling invisible and second best. I learned that it wasn't just about my family's behavior, it was about how I had internalized it, how I had learned to make myself smaller to fit their expectations. Jane and I started building a real relationship, not one based on competition or resentment. We found out we actually had a lot in common when we weren't being pitted against each other. She became one of my biggest supporters when I started my music production business, even investing some of her savings to help me get started. Last month, I produced my first album for an up and coming local artist. When it was finished, I invited my family to the studio for a private listening session. Watching their faces as the music played, seeing their genuine pride and interest, I felt something heal inside me. Dad didn't once mention that Jane's corporate job was more stable. Mom didn't make any worried comments about financial security. They just listened, really listened, just like they'd learned to listen to me. After the session, as we were leaving the studio, Jane pulled me aside. "You know," she said, "I used to be jealous of you too." I looked at her, surprised. "What? Why?" "You were always the favorite," she shook her head. "You were always so sure of who you were, even when you were quiet about it. I was just trying to be what they wanted. When you left that Christmas, it made me realize how much I was playing a role, too." That conversation with Jane opened up a whole new understanding between us. We'd both been trapped in roles we never chose. She as the golden child, me as the invisible one. Breaking free of those roles had allowed us both to become who we really were. Dad changed the most dramatically. The stern, distant father who had given me the dollar store Christmas gift became someone who called regularly just to check in, who shared his own vulnerabilities and admitted when he was wrong. Last week, he confessed that he had been raised in a similar environment of favoritism, always compared to his sister, never quite measuring up. "I did to you what was done to me," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't even realize I was repeating the pattern until you had the courage to walk away." Mom found her voice too. She started standing up more, not just following Dad's lead. She began sharing stories about her own struggles with feeling invisible in her family and how she had projected those feelings onto our family dynamic without realizing it. The healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns emerged, times when I had to remind them and myself of the boundaries we'd established. But each time we stumbled, we got better at catching ourselves, at communicating, at making things right. This Christmas will be different. We're having dinner at my apartment, my choice, my space, my rules. Jane's bringing her new girlfriend, someone she feels safe introducing to the family now that the pressure to be perfect is lifted. Mom's actually excited about helping me cook instead of trying to take over the kitchen. Dad asked what music I wanted to play instead of just putting on his old playlist. The cheap notebook and dead pen from that Christmas morning sit in a box in my closet. I keep them as a reminder, not of the pain, but of the moment I found my voice. Sometimes the worst gifts turn out to be the most valuable, not for what they are, but for what they make you realize about yourself. Looking back now, I understand that walking away wasn't just about making my family see me. It was about learning to see myself. It was about realizing that being loved shouldn't require becoming invisible, that family shouldn't mean sacrificing who you are. The journey from that Christmas morning to today hasn't been easy. There were times I questioned everything, times I wondered if I made the right choice in coming back. But as I sit here in my apartment, looking at the family photos on my wall, real smiles, real connections, real love, I know that sometimes you have to break something to fix it properly. My story isn't over. We're still learning, still growing, still figuring out this new dynamic we've created. But now we're doing it together. Together, each of us visible, each of us valued, each of us heard. And maybe that's what family is supposed to be all about. Update. Wow, I didn't expect this post to blow up like it has. Thank you all for the supportive comments and messages. To those asking, yes, my music production business is doing well. I just signed my second artist, and Jane's been helping me with the business side of things. It's funny how life works out sometimes. And to everyone sharing similar stories in the comments, you're not alone. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it can also be the most important. Don't be afraid to demand the respect you deserve, even from family, especially from family. Last edit, someone asked what happened to the dead pen and dollar store notebook. I actually ended up using that notebook to write my first song lyrics after I started pursuing music. Turns out, sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. The pen, though, still doesn't work. Some things you just can't fix, but you can learn from them.